The air at 29 Palms tasted of dust and diesel. It coated the tongue, a fine grit that settled in the lungs and never quite left. Gunnery Sergeant Anya Sharma stepped out of the Humvee, the desert sun a physical weight on her shoulders. The heat radiated in shimmering waves from the asphalt, making the distant hangars and barracks wobble like a mirage. She wore her woodland Marpat utilities, crisp and functional, her posture a straight line of disciplined economy. In her hand, she carried a long, rectangular rifle case made of faded olive-drab canvas, its edges frayed and corners softened by years of use. It was a stark contrast to the sleek, black polymer cases the other Marines were hauling from the gear truck. A group of them stood nearby, their youth and arrogance a palpable force field. They were the Scout Sniper Platoon, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines. Lean, hard-eyed men who moved with the predatory grace of apex hunters. Their laughter was sharp and loud in the dry air as they watched her approach. Their eyes flickered from her face, to the rank on her collar, and then settled with open amusement on the canvas case. Their platoon sergeant, a staff sergeant with a jawline like a granite block, stepped forward. "Gunny, welcome to the stumps." He didn't offer to take her case. "Staff Sergeant," Sharma replied, her voice even, betraying no reaction to the heat or the scrutiny. A captain emerged from the command post, a concrete box that seemed to sweat in the sun. Captain Eva Rostova was as severe as the landscape, her gaze analytical and impatient. She held a tablet, her thumb flicking across its screen. "Gunnery Sergeant Sharma?" "Ma'am." Rostova's eyes did the same dismissive inventory as her men's, lingering for a moment on the antiquated rifle case. "I read your file. HQ says you're here as an adjunct evaluator for our pre-deployment workup. It's an unusual assignment." The word unusual was laced with suspicion. It meant unwanted, unnecessary. "Orders are orders, ma'am." From the cluster of snipers, a voice, loud enough to carry, dripped with condescension. "Check out the antique roadshow. Bet she's got a musket in there." A ripple of laughter followed. The speaker was Sergeant Rex Connolly, callsign Carnage. He was the platoon's golden boy, a prodigy with a custom-built Mk-13 Mod 7 that he treated with more reverence than the flag. He leaned against a gear cage, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. He was the kind of Marine who believed excellence was loud, that skill had to be announced. Sharma's gaze swept over him, and the others, for a brief, unreadable moment. There was no anger in her eyes, no defensiveness. There was nothing but a quiet, unnerving stillness, the placid surface of a deep lake. She had seen 100 Canellis in her career. They were a known quantity, a predictable variable in an unpredictable world. Captain Rostova's lips thinned. She disliked open insubordination, but she also shared her sergeant's sentiment. The assignment felt like a slight, as if command didn't trust her to train her own men. This woman, with her quiet demeanor and her grandfather's rifle case, felt like a liability, a box to be checked. "Sergeant Connolly," Rostova said, her voice sharp enough to cut the laughter short. "Secure your gear. Platoon, assemble in the briefing room in 5. Gunnery Sergeant, with me." Sharma followed the captain into the air-conditioned chill of the CP. The sudden temperature change was a shock to the system. Inside, maps covered the walls, overlaid with acetate markings. The room smelled of stale coffee and ozone from the humming servers. Rostova tossed the tablet onto a metal desk. "Let's be clear, Gunny. I run a top-tier platoon. My men are the best. They've broken every record on every range from here to Quantico. Sergeant Connolly holds the schoolhouse record for the 1,000-yard cold bore. They trust their equipment and they trust me. I don't know why you're here, but you will not interfere with my training schedule. You will observe, you will take your notes, and you will remain in the background. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, ma'am," Sharma said. She placed her canvas case on the floor beside her, gently, as if it contained something fragile. The gesture seemed to amplify Rostova's irritation. "And that thing," Rostova gestured toward the case. "We're a professional outfit. We use modern weapon systems. Whatever relic you're carrying, keep it stowed. You'll be issued a standard M4 for the duration. With all due respect, ma'am, Sharma said, her voice still level, still calm. This is my rifle. It's what I use. It's a liability, Rostova snapped. My men need to see a consistent standard of excellence. They don't need to see nostalgia. The door opened and Connolly stuck his head in. Ma'am, platoons formed. He glanced at Sharma, then at the case, and his smirk returned, wider this time. Dismissed, Gunny? Rostova said, turning back to her maps, her body language a clear wall of rejection. Sharma picked up her case and walked out, back into the oppressive heat. The snipers were lined up in a loose formation, their high-tech rifles slung over their shoulders. The black carbon fiber and desert tan chassis of their weapons gleamed. Connolly fell in with them, whispering something that made two of the younger Marines snicker. She walked past them toward the transient billets, the canvas case held firmly in her hand. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She could feel their judgment, a palpable wave of derision. It was as familiar to her as the smell of gunpowder and the cold weight of steel. It was just another kind of wind, another variable to be accounted for before the shot. The next morning, the platoon was on the known distance range. The sun was already a brutal hammer, even at 0700. A persistent crosswind whipped dust devils across the baked earth, a sniper's nightmare. The targets were steel silhouettes, placed at ranges from 300 to 1,000 yards. The platoon's shooters were in their element. They lay prone on their mats, their magnificent rifles resting on bipods. Each shooter had a spotter beside him, whispering wind calls and corrections derived from the data streaming from their Kestrel weather meters and the complex grid reticles in their multi-thousand-dollar scopes. The air was filled with the technical jargon of the modern marksman. Send it. The heavy crack of a .300 Winchester Magnum echoed, followed a second later by the satisfying ping of a solid hit on steel a half-mile away. Connolly was holding court, effortlessly ringing the 1,000-yard target again and again. Each shot was a performance. He'd fire, then roll onto his side, grinning at his spotter as the impact registered. Too easy, he'd say, loud enough for everyone to hear. This rifle's a laser beam. Captain Rostova stood behind the firing line, arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Her men were machines. This was the excellence she had spoken of. Gunnery Sergeant Sharma stood well back, near the ammunition truck, observing. She hadn't brought her rifle to the line. She just watched, her eyes tracking the trace of the bullets, noting the way the wind gusted and eddied around the small hills downrange. She wasn't looking at the shooters. She was reading the range, absorbing its rhythms. After an hour, Rostova walked over to her. Impressed? Gunny? They're good shooters, ma'am. Well trained. They're the best, Rostova corrected her. Now, I have you scheduled for familiarization fire this afternoon. I trust you'll use the M110 we're signing out for you. It was a statement, not a question. I brought my own rifle, ma'am, Sharma said quietly. Rostova's jaw tightened. She saw this as a direct challenge, a stubborn refusal to integrate. Fine. Let's see it. Let's see the museum piece. The entire firing line went quiet. Every sniper turned to watch. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Connolly got to his feet, a look of theatrical curiosity on his face. Sharma walked to her station at the far end of the line, the one left empty for her. She knelt and unbuckled the straps on the canvas case. She didn't hurry. Her movements were deliberate, precise. She folded back the flap to reveal the rifle within. A collective, barely suppressed snort went through the platoon. It was an M40A1. Not even a later A3 or A5 model, but a true A1, the kind the Corps had used in the 80s and 90s. It had a heavy wooden stock, the walnut stained dark with age and linseed oil. The stock was scarred and nicked, a roadmap of a hard life. The barrel was a simple, heavy steel tube, its bluing worn thin near the muzzle. Mounted on top was not a modern optic with a 34mm tube and Christmas tree reticle, but a long, thin, green anodized unertl 10x scope, the kind held in place by external mounts. It was an artifact. Connolly laughed out loud. Holy smokes, Gunny. Did you pull that out of the Paris Island Museum? My dad qualified with one of those. It's a fine rifle, Sergeant, Sharma said, her voice soft as she lifted it from the case. She handled it with a surgeon's care. A fine rifle for a VFW parade, another Marine muttered. Sharma ignored them. She lay prone, settling the rifle into the pocket of her shoulder. The wood of the stock was smooth against her cheek. She didn't use a bipod, resting the forestock on a simple sand-filled sock. She didn't have a kestrel. She didn't have a ballistic calculator app on her phone. She pulled a worn leather-bound notebook from her pocket, along with a pencil. She licked the tip of the pencil and made a small notation. What's your dope for 800, Gunny? Connolly called out, his voice mocking. You got a slide rule for that. Sharma didn't answer. She reached up and began making adjustments to the Unertle's external micrometer knobs. The clicks were quiet but sharp. She squinted, watching the mirage dance above the hardpan. She plucked a single blade of dry grass and let it fall, watching its path. Then she settled, her body becoming perfectly still. Rostova watched, her skepticism hardening into annoyance. This was a waste of time, a ridiculous display of antiquated stubbornness. Sharma's breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible. She took a final, steadying breath, let half of it out, and the world seemed to narrow to the single point at the end of her crosshairs. The rifle cracked, a sharp, authoritative sound, distinct from the deeper boom of the 300 Win mags. All eyes went to the 800-yard target. For a second, there was nothing. Then, a faint clang drifted back on the wind. A small, black mark appeared dead center on the steel plate. Silence. Connolly's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. A lucky shot. A fluke. Sharma worked the bolt of her rifle, a smooth, practiced motion, and chambered another round. She made a minute adjustment to her windage knob. Again she settled. Again the rifle cracked. Again the delayed clang from 800 yards. A second black mark appeared, almost touching the first. She fired 3 more shots, all in the same methodical, unhurried rhythm. When she was done, 5 rounds of 308 Winchester had formed a tight, fist-sized group in the very center of the target. It was a group that Connolly, with his laser beam rifle, had been struggling to match all morning in the shifting wind. Rostova stared through her binoculars, her mouth a firm line. It was a fluke. A damn good fluke, but still a fluke. All right, Gunny, Connolly said, his voice a little tighter. Not bad for an old-timer. Let's see you do that at a grand. Sharma didn't say a word. She just worked her bolt, chambered a fresh round, and shifted her focus to the farthest target. The small steel square shimmering in the heat at 1,000 yards. The wind was trickier out there, a fickle serpent that could push a bullet several feet off course. She closed her eyes for a moment, just feeling the breeze on her face. She opened them, made her adjustments, and fired. The crack of the rifle, the long, silent wait, and then, faintly, the unmistakable ring of steel on steel. Dead center. Connolly stared, his jaw slack. He looked at his kestrel, which was reading a 12 miles per hour full-value crosswind. He looked at his own ballistic data. The shot with that rifle, with that ammunition, in this wind, shouldn't have been possible. Not without the tech. Not with an antique scope with no holdover marks. Sharma simply ejected the spent casing, its brass glinting in the sun, and prepared for the next shot. The dismissal on the firing line had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, grudging silence. The final evaluation exercise was a 3-day ordeal known as the Serpent's Path. It was designed to push the platoon to its absolute limit. The scenario was a deep reconnaissance and interdiction mission in a simulated hostile territory that spanned over 50 square miles of the most unforgiving terrain in 29 Palms. The objective was to infiltrate, identify and prosecute 3 high-value targets, and then exfiltrate without being detected by a large, well-equipped opposing force, OPFOR. Sharma was assigned to Connolly's team as an observer. The placement was deliberate on Rostova's part. A subtle power play to put Sharma under the authority of the platoon's best shooter. Connolly accepted it with a tight, resentful nod. The incident on the range had wounded his pride, but he'd rationalized it away as a fluke, a bit of old-school luck that wouldn't hold up under real pressure. The first day was a grueling 20-kilometer ruck march through jagged hills under a punishing sun. The second day was spent in a hide site, a cramped, miserable hole scraped out of the side of a ravine, where they observed their first target. Connolly made the shot from 1,200 yards, a clean hit that temporarily restored his swagger. Sharma said nothing, just made notes in her leather-bound book. Her stillness was a constant, unnerving presence. The crisis began on the morning of the third day. The sky, which had been a relentless, cloudless blue, turned a sickly yellow-gray on the horizon. The wind picked up, howling through the canyons, carrying a fine, choking dust. A weather alert crackled over the radio, warning of an approaching haboob, a massive, violent sandstorm. "We need to move," Rostova's voice ordered over the comms. "The Opfer will be grounded. Use the storm as cover and push to your final objective." "Acknowledge." Connolly acknowledged, his voice confident. "No problem, ma'am. This is what we train for." Within an hour, the world disappeared. The sky turned a churning, opaque brown. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. The wind screamed, a physical force that tore at their gear and drove sand into every crevice of their bodies, their weapons, their eyes. It was like being trapped inside a sandblaster. The temperature plummeted. The team huddled behind a rock outcropping, trying to orient themselves. Their technology, their greatest advantage, began to fail them. The GPS units lost their satellite locks, their screens showing nothing but a searching icon. The sensitive electronics of their laser rangefinders were choked with dust. "What's our position?" Connolly yelled over the wind to his spotter, a young corporal named Carter. Carter shielded his GPS with his body, tapping furiously at the screen. "I don't know, Sarge. I can't get a fix. The storm's blocking the signal." Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of their discipline. They were blind. The map was useless without a known position. The storm had erased every landmark, turning the landscape into a featureless, roaring void. Connolly's high-end scope, a marvel of optical engineering, was now a liability. The immense objective lens was coated in a fine layer of grit. The battery-powered illuminated reticle, essential for low-light targeting, flickered and died as dust infiltrated the housing. He tried to use the manual stadia lines, but the swirling sand made the mirage so intense that the target area was an unreadable blur. His Kestrel was a dead piece of plastic, its delicate impeller jammed with sand. They were lost, deaf and blind. The confidence that had defined them was being sandblasted away, leaving behind the raw nerve of fear. "Everyone stay put," Connolly ordered, his voice strained. "We'll wait it out. Just stay put." It was the only order he could think to give. It was an admission of defeat. Through it all, Gunnery Sergeant Sharma remained impassive. She had cinched a simple scarf over her mouth and nose. She hadn't bothered with a GPS. While the others were staring at dead screens, she had pulled out a simple Landsat compass and her map, shielding them from the wind with her body. Her old M40A1 was wrapped in a strip of canvas, protecting its action. Her inertial scope, with its simple mechanics and sealed nitrogen-filled tube, was perfectly clear. Its external adjustments, while archaic, were robust and immune to the dust. She let them sit in their indecision for 10 minutes, watching them, gauging their state of mind. She saw the fear in Carter's eyes, the frustration turning to despair in Connolly's. Finally, she moved. She crawled over to Connolly, her movements economical even in the gale. "Sergeant," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the wind's howl. "We need to move. The Opfer won't be grounded. They'll be hunting." "Hunting what? They can't see any more than we can," Connolly shouted back, his frustration boiling over. "They're from this base," Sharma stated simply. "They know this terrain by heart. They don't need GPS. They'll be checking the natural shelters, the places where a lost team would go to ground. Like this one. We've been here too long. The logic was cold and undeniable. Cut through Connolly's panic. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't even concerned. She was working. Where do we go? He asked. The arrogance finally stripped from his voice. It was a genuine question. Sharma pointed into the brown chaos. The objective is on the other side of that ridge. 2 clicks. Bearing 295. There's a dry wash about 500 meters from here that will give us some cover from the wind. We can navigate by terrain association. Let's go. She didn't wait for his approval. She got up and started moving, a dark shape leaning into the wind. After a moment's hesitation, Carter scrambled to his feet and followed her. Then the other 2 members of the team, left with no choice, his authority usurped by simple, undeniable competence. Connolly swore under his breath and followed. She led them not by sight, but by a deeper sense of the land. She used the slope of the ground, the direction of the wind, the feel of the rock under her boots. She moved from one piece of microterrain to the next, a ghost in the storm. For 2 hours they followed, a miserable train of high-tech soldiers being led by a woman with a compass and an instinct they couldn't comprehend. Finally, she brought them to a halt at the edge of a shallow escarpment. The wind was slightly less brutal here. We're here, she said. The objective is down there, an abandoned communications bunker. The HVT is a simulated command and control vehicle parked next to it. They peered into the swirling dust. They could see nothing. Where? Carter asked, his voice full of doubt. I can't see a thing. Range is approximately 750 yards, Sharma said. She unwrapped her rifle. The wooden stock felt solid and reassuring in her hands. The wind is gusting from left to right, maybe 40 miles per hour in the open, but it's swirling down in that basin. You have to ignore the gusts up here and read the patterns down there. Read what? It's a brown wall, Connolly protested, raising his useless, fogged scope. It's impossible. No, Sharma said, settling into a prone position and resting her rifle on her pack. It's just difficult. She lay motionless, her eye pressed to the old inertal scope. The world through the optic was a blurry, chaotic mess of swirling sand. To the others, it was an impenetrable curtain. To her, it was a language. She watched the way thicker veins of dust moved, the way small pebbles were kicked up from the ground below. These were the telltale signs of the true wind, the ground wind that would affect the bullet's flight path for the majority of its journey. She ignored the screaming gale around her and focused on those subtle cues. In her mind, a complex calculation was taking place, a fluid algorithm of wind speed, spin drift, barometric pressure, and humidity that she had perfected over 2 decades of relentless practice. It was a process more instinctual than mathematical, a conversation between her, the rifle, and the environment. I'm seeing glimpses, she said, her voice a low murmur, almost a whisper to herself. The vehicle is next to a large rock formation. You can see its antenna whip for a split second when the wind shifts. Connolly and Carter put their own optics up, desperately trying to see what she was seeing. They saw only brown chaos. Their expensive, multi-coated lenses, designed for crisp sight pictures in clear weather, were overwhelmed. Sharma's older scope, with its simpler glass, seemed to cut through the haze just enough. I can't see it, Gunny, Carter said, his voice laced with frustration. There's nothing there. It's there, Sharma replied. She worked the bolt, chambering a round of 175-grain match-grade ammunition. She reached up and made a significant adjustment on her scope's external windage knob, clicking it far to the left into the wind. It looked like an extreme, almost foolish amount of compensation. Gunny, that's too much hold, Connolly said, his training kicking in despite his disbelief. You'll be 10 feet left of the target. Sharma didn't reply. Her breathing slowed. The howling of the wind seemed to fade into a dull roar in the background. Her world shrank to the eyepiece of the inertal, to the fine crosshairs, and the fleeting, ghostly images within the storm. She waited. Patience was the first and last virtue of the sniper. The others fidgeted, cold and miserable. Sharma was as still as the rock she lay on. A full minute passed. Then another. "There," she whispered. For a fraction of a second, a gust of wind cleared a tunnel through the dust, a momentary window. In that window, blurred but undeniable, was the dark shape of the command vehicle, its long antenna swaying violently. It was visible for no more than a heartbeat. The M40A1 cracked. The sound was instantly swallowed by the storm. The recoil pushed the rifle back into her shoulder, a familiar, comforting punch. She never lost the sight picture, her follow-through perfect. She watched the space where the target had been. "Did you get it?" Carter yelled. "Impact in 3, 2, 1. Sharma counted calmly. From the swirling gloom below, a flash of yellow light erupted, the unmistakable sign of the simulator on the target vehicle being triggered. A hit. The team stared in stunned silence. They hadn't even seen the target, let alone been able to range it or calculate a firing solution. She had shot at a ghost in a hurricane and hit it. Connolly lowered his binoculars, his face a mask of disbelief. Every instinct, every bit of his training told him that shot was pure luck, a 1 in a million chance. But he had seen her on the range. He had seen the quiet, absolute confidence with which she operated. This wasn't luck. It was mastery on a level he couldn't comprehend. "The Opfer will have heard the simulator," Sharma said, already working her bolt, her eyes scanning for the next target. "They'll be moving. There are 2 dismounted sentries near the bunker entrance. They'll be disoriented, looking for the source of the shot." "We can't see them," Connolly said, his voice now devoid of any challenge. It was a simple statement of fact. "I can," Sharma said. "They're moving. Just shadows in the dust." Again she waited. The wind howled, a relentless assault. Sharma was a predator, her patience absolute. She saw a flicker of movement, a shape that was slightly darker than the surrounding brown. It was a human form stumbling through the gale. The rifle cracked a second time. Another long pause, and then a second yellow light flashed in the gloom, this one smaller, from the impact sensor on the Opfer soldier's vest. "One left," Sharma said. She shifted her position slightly, scanning a different sector. She found the last target trying to take cover behind the bunker. It was a partial target, mostly obscured. She held her breath, waited for the wind to shift just so, and fired a third time. Crack, pause, flash. 3 targets, 3 shots, all taken in conditions that should have made precision fire utterly impossible. The exercise's 3 primary objectives were complete. The storm raged for another hour before its fury began to subside. As the wind slowly died down and the thick dust began to settle, the world gradually reappeared. The first thing they saw clearly was the scene below them. The command vehicle sat exactly where Sharma had said it would be, a yellow flag now raised from its turret. 2 training dummies lay on the ground near the bunker entrance, their hit indicators blinking. The Serpent's path was over. They had won. Or rather, she had. As the last of the haboob dissipated, replaced by a hazy, dust-choked sky, a pair of Humvees came bouncing over the terrain. They were the exercise controllers, the white hats, coming to assess the final action. They pulled up near the team's position. The passenger door of the lead vehicle opened and a master gunnery sergeant stepped out. He was an old-school Marine, a man whose face was a roadmap of deployments from Beirut to Kandahar. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. He was a legend in the reconnaissance community, a man who had forgotten more about sniping than most people ever learned. He strode toward the team, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in the disposition of the targets and the team on the ridge. Captain Rostova was in the second Humvee. She got out and hurried to catch up, her face a mixture of anxiety and confusion. Her comms had been down for hours. She had no idea what had happened to her platoon. She saw her men, alive and well, and felt a surge of relief. Then she saw the completed objectives and felt a surge of pride. "Report, Sergeant Connolly," she commanded as she approached. Connolly stood up, his face smudged with dirt, his arrogance completely gone. He looked like a student who had just been humbled by a grandmaster. "Ma'am, objectives neutralized. All 3-inch. Rostova's eyes widened. "In the storm? How?" Connolly didn't answer. He just looked toward the prone figure at the end of their line. Sharma was methodically clearing her rifle, her movements as calm and precise as if she'd just finished a casual day at the range. Master Guns Thorne's eyes followed Connolly's gaze. He stopped short. His hard, weathered face broke into a slow smile of recognition. He ignored everyone else and walked straight to Sharma. "I'll be damned," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I'd recognize that rifle anywhere. Still haven't let them put that old girl out to pasture. Have you, Weaver?" The name hung in the air. Weaver. It wasn't a flashy call sign like Carnage or Reaper. It was simple, functional. It spoke of threading a needle through a hurricane. Sharma looked up, a flicker of acknowledgement in her eyes. "It still works, Master Guns." Captain Rostova and the entire platoon stared, confused. Connolly's brow furrowed. He'd heard that call sign before in stories told by old instructors at the schoolhouse. A ghost story, a legend about a MARSOC operator from the early days, a shooter who could make impossible shots, who preferred the old M40 because it was an extension of their own senses. They always told the story as if the shooter was a man. Thorne chuckled and hunkered down beside her, looking at the M40A1 with genuine affection. "Works? Hell, this rifle and the woman behind it wrote half the damn TNR manual for high-angle and high-wind shooting. I was a young buck sergeant spotting for her in the Shuriak Valley. We were pinned down, taking heavy PKM fire from a ridge we couldn't even properly see. She put 3 rounds through a sandstorm, into an aperture no bigger than a shoebox, and shut the whole thing down. From 1,400 meters, he turned his gaze to Rostova and the stunned snipers. You men think your fancy scopes and weather trackers make you snipers? That's just tech. It's a crutch. This," he tapped the wooden stock of Sharma's rifle, "is an instrument, and she is the virtuoso." Gunnery Sergeant Sharma was one of the lead instructors for the Marine Special Operations Command's Level 1 sniper course before she rotated out to a training command. "She's forgotten more about long-range ballistics than your computers will ever know." The revelation settled over the platoon like a physical weight. The quiet woman they had mocked, the gunny with the museum piece, was not just some random evaluator. She was a living legend. Her presence here wasn't a slight. It was an honor they hadn't been sharp enough to recognize. The old rifle wasn't a sign of being behind the times. It was a mark of mastery. It was a black belt, a symbol that she had transcended the need for technological aids and relied on a pure, unadulterated skill that bordered on art. Rostova's face was pale. She looked from Thorne to Sharma, her mind replaying every dismissive word she had said, every skeptical glance. She had been so blinded by her own platoon's superficial excellence, their gear, their range scores, that she had failed to recognize true, profound competence when it stood right in front of her. Connolly felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck. His mockery, his arrogance, it all seemed so childish now. He had preened and postured with his expensive rifle, a child playing with a fancy toy, while a true master sat quietly watching, holding an instrument she had bonded with through blood and fire. He looked at his own Mk13, a marvel of modern manufacturing. It was a superior weapon on paper, but a weapon was only as good as the person wielding it. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he was not worthy to clean her rifle. The ride back to the main base was silent. No one spoke. The usual post-exercise bravado was absent. Connolly sat in the back of the Humvee, staring at the scarred stock of Sharma's M40A1, which she held cradled in her lap. Every nick and scratch on that piece of wood was a story, a lesson he hadn't earned the right to hear. Back at the platoon barracks, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken apologies. The snipers moved with a quiet deference, avoiding Sharma's gaze not out of disrespect, but out of a deep and profound sense of shame for their earlier behavior. They stripped and cleaned their own weapons with a new, almost frantic intensity, as if trying to scrub away their own ignorance. Later that evening, as Sharma sat on her bunk oiling the bolt of her rifle, Captain Rostova appeared in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, her posture stiff, her face unreadable. "Gunnery Sergeant," she said, her voice formal. Sharma looked up, her hands never ceasing their methodical work. "Ma'am." Rostova stepped inside. Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne briefed the battalion commander. "Your evaluation of the platoon's performance in the storm." It was noted. She paused. "The shot on the command vehicle. The controller's instruments said the wind at the target was gusting to 45 miles per hour. The official report is logging it as the most difficult shot ever recorded in a training exercise at this facility." Sharma simply nodded, sliding the freshly oiled bolt back into the receiver. The action was smooth as glass. "I was wrong, Gunny," Rostova said, the words costing her a visible effort. "I underestimated you. I mistook quiet competence for something else. It will not happen again." It wasn't an apology, not in the traditional sense. It was a statement of fact from one professional to another. It was a concession of respect. "The men are good shooters, Captain," Sharma said, offering an unexpected piece of grace. "They just rely too much on their gear. The gear can fail. The fundamentals never do." Rostova nodded, accepting the lesson. "For the remainder of the workup," she said, her tone now one of a subordinate asking a favor, "I would like you to take over the platoon's long-range and adverse weather training. I want you to teach them what you know." "I'd be happy to, ma'am." As Rostova left, Connolly appeared. He stood in the doorway, shifting his weight, his eyes fixed on the floor. He looked less like a fearsome sniper and more like a chastened schoolboy. "Gunny," he started, his voice rough. He couldn't find the words to apologize. They felt hollow, inadequate. Instead, he changed tack, his voice lowering with genuine curiosity. "That first shot, on the vehicle, your hold off for the wind, it was more than my software recommended. Way more. How did you know?" Sharma looked at him, her expression not of triumph, but of something akin to sympathy. She recognized the look in his eyes, the desperate hunger of a student who has just realized the vastness of his own ignorance. "Your software gives you the data for the wind where you are," she explained patiently. "It can't tell you what's happening in the valley between you and the target. The storm was creating a vortex down there. The wind was moving faster in the basin than it was up on the ridge. You have to learn to see the unseen, to read the dust." She picked up a cleaning patch and began wiping down the wooden stock of her rifle. Connolly watched her, mesmerized by the economy of her movements. Without a word, he walked to the corner, picked up her cleaning kit, and brought it over. He opened a fresh bottle of bore solvent and began methodically cleaning her rifle's barrel, a task of immense, unspoken significance. It was an act of fealty, an admission that he was in the presence of a master. Soon, Corporal Carter and 2 other Marines joined him, silently taking over the maintenance of her gear, handling the old rifle with the reverence they would accord a holy relic. Sharma watched them for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and let them. Late that night, the armory was silent except for the low hum of a dehumidifier. The racks were filled with the platoon's high-tech rifles, all clean and sterile. At a solitary workbench, under the stark glow of a single utility lamp, Anya Sharma was putting the final touches on her M40A1. The scent of Hoppa's No. 9 and gun oil hung in the air, a familiar, comforting incense. She ran a soft, oiled cloth over the dark walnut stock, her fingers tracing the landscape of scars and dents that marred its surface. Each mark was a memory, a waypoint in a long and difficult journey. She wasn't just cleaning a tool. She was communing with a partner. The door creaked open. Corporal Carter stood there, silhouetted against the hallway light. He was the youngest on the team, the one whose mockery had been more imitative than malicious. "Gunny?" he said softly, as if not wanting to disturb a sacred ritual. Sharma looked up. "Corporal." Carter stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. He didn't speak for a long moment, just watched her hands move over the rifle. "I'm sorry, Gunny," he finally managed to say, the words rushing out, "for how we acted. We were idiots." Sharma paused her work and looked at the young Marine. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. "You're not idiots, Carter. You're just young. You believe what you can see. The trick is to believe in what you can't." Carter nodded, though he didn't fully understand. His eyes fell upon the rifle stock, near the pistol grip. In the harsh light of the workbench lamp, he could see a series of tiny, hand-carved marks in the wood, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. They weren't kill tallies. They were too few, too deliberate. "What are those, ma'am?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sharma followed his gaze. She ran her thumb over the small collection of scratches. She was silent for a long time, and Carter thought she wasn't going to answer. "This one," she said, her thumb resting on a single, deeper gouge set slightly apart from the others. "Afghanistan. A village elder had a daughter, maybe 7 years old. She was taken by insurgents. We tracked them to a compound in the mountains. They were holding her on a balcony, using her as a shield. My spotter couldn't get a clear range. The wind was bad. It was a long shot, over 1,000 yards. She stared at the mark, but her eyes were seeing something far away. Everyone said to wait, to call in an airstrike. But an airstrike would have leveled the compound, killed the girl for sure. I had a window, just a few seconds. The insurgent moved his head to shout at someone, and it cleared her shoulder. I took the shot." She fell silent again. The hum of the dehumidifier seemed to grow louder. "It was a good shot," she said, her voice flat, devoid of any pride. "But the sound of a high-velocity round passing that close to a child's head." She screamed. "I can still hear it sometimes. This mark isn't for him. It's for her. It's to remind me that even a perfect shot has a cost. It's to remember that what we do is a heavy thing." Carter stood frozen, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had only ever thought of sniping in terms of skill, of wind calls and trigger presses, of the satisfying ring of steel. He had never considered the moral gravity that lay on the other side of the scope. Sharma finished wiping down the rifle and laid it carefully in its worn canvas case. She buckled the straps, her movements slow and deliberate. The ritual was complete. She stood and walked to the armory door, placing a hand on Carter's shoulder as she passed. "Get some sleep, Marine," she said. He was left alone in the quiet armory, the smell of gun oil and the weight of a story he would never forget. Sharma didn't go to her billet. Instead, she walked to the edge of the base, to a low hill that overlooked the vast, sleeping desert. The moon was a sliver in the ink-black sky, and the stars were a brilliant, cold fire. She sat, her back against a rock, and kept a silent watch. The night was calm now. The wind was just a whisper. She stayed there for hours, a solitary, still figure. As the first hint of dawn began to bleed across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gray, she finally allowed herself to relax. The light crept across the desert, revealing the stark, brutal beauty of the landscape she had conquered. It was a place of extremes, a place that stripped away everything but the essential. It had stripped away the arrogance of a platoon of young men and revealed the truth of her own quiet strength. Her rifle was safe. Her lesson had been taught. Her watch was over. The sun rose, and Gunnery Sergeant Anya Sharma, callsign Weaver, finally closed her eyes.